Welcome to Pressure Point. This week, we are 4 Asian Canadian women who would like to share with you how we found and reclaimed our voices and how we continue to find and reclaim our voices. We span 4 decades and 4 cultures. Who we are is reflected in our names, our cultures, our languages, and our journeys. We do not claim to speak on behalf of our other Asian sisters, but we will share with you our own experiences. My name is Marilou Carillo, and I was born and raised in the Philippines. I came to Canada as an adult.
And I'm Komiyama, and I think I better point out to you that I'm the oldest of the 4 of you here. I was born right here in Canada, right in this city, Vancouver, and I've spent all my life here. And I have taken 2 trips back to Japan, very short ones, but that's all I know of Japan. I'm Canadian.
And my name's Jin-Sun Yoon, and I was born in Korea, but I came to Canada as a child, and have been raised in North Delta.
My name is Greer Anne Wenh-In Ng. That is according to the Cantonese dialect, because in the north, my last name would be pronounced Wu. I was born in Hong Kong, actually, just missed being born inside China, but grew up in various parts of Southeast Asia, for example, Macau and North Vietnam, in the city of Hanoi. I have studied in New York and have taught in Singapore. Right now, I'm in Vancouver, teaching at the Vancouver School of Theology.
Why don't we start talking about our names? We have such varied names. People often ask me why an Asian person like myself would have a Spanish-sounding last name. It seems so obvious to me, but it isn't at all obvious to too many people. The Philippines were conquered by the Spaniards for over 300 years, and the indigenous people were decreed to change their last names. So my name actually reflects the colonial history of an indigenous people in Southeast Asia, and my first name reflects the religion that conquering culture carried. So my name says quite a lot, not only about who I am, but of the country and the people that from where I come from. What about your names?
Well, I'll start with my first name. It might surprise you. I got the name May because I was born in the month of May. Isn't that amazing? But my last name right now is Komiyama, and names are always very important in the Japanese culture. And Yama means mountain, and I think you all have all heard of Fujiyama, Mount Fuji, Fujiyama. Well, Komiyama is mountain. Komi is a small temple in the side-off. So that's my name now. But before I was married, I was Yamasaki. So I was still a mountain, Yama. But Saki means the peak of.
Ah.
So I've come from the peak of the mountain down to the side of the mountain to a little temple.
My name, my last name, actually, I don't know what it means. Just thought of it right now, but it is reflective of the village we come from. And the first part of my name, Jin, is my mother's maiden name, and the second part's my given name, though it is fairly unusual in Korean tradition, but it seems to be quite trendy now to name your child with the mother's maiden name. And my name means true goodness. I guess my parents wanted me to grow into it or something.
But you hadn't always used Jin-Sun.
No. When we came to Canada, I was 5, and I was given an English name, which I was raised with. And I reclaimed my Korean name about 10 years ago when I was traveling in India.
Why was that? What happened?
Well, I met 2 very, very British people, and I suddenly realized that my Scottish name just didn't work with me over there. I felt very disconnected from that name. Being raised in Delta, it was okay, though I never really liked the name. Other people named Bonnie, I didn't mind, but for myself, it was very difficult for me to introduce myself as Bonnie. I'm much happier having my Korean name.
And it's interesting, it happened when you were in India, in yet another rich culture, and you were in a different context with European people.
Well, I guess I felt more Asian there, and that was the first time I'd been back to Asia. I'd spent 6 months in Korea and then went traveling in the rest of Asia, so I felt more at home in a sense.
Well, you know, you may be a decade after me, but you did something which took me longer to do, because I have just recently reclaimed my name also, my Chinese name. So I need to explain that, like your parents, my parents gave all of us children, and there were 8 of us, English names, because they felt it was much easier for the colonial society that we were born in, because Hong Kong was a British colony, to have English names at school. But of course, we were all given our Chinese names. So in my family, all the girls had the name, the character Wenh, and then my name was In. So what I have reclaimed is Wenh-In. Is my maiden name, and then Wenh-In are my given names. Wen means to recite poetry or to sing, and In means to smile. You know, parents have great hopes of their kids. But if you look at the Chinese characters, you'll see why. Because, well, is the name of a kingdom, so I'm quite proud of that. But the word Wen actually has, the left side is speech, and the right side is the symbol for forever, but we take the sound from that. And this In, the left radical, is the symbol for a woman or a female, and the right side again is a phonetic kind of value, so it just sounds like In, so we've taken that. Actually, I only did this officially at our BC conference last month. May was the president then, so I was very proud to have done that when she was president. And I did this because with just Greer Anne, it's all very well, but it doesn't say who I am completely. And I guess that's part of my discovery about myself. And so this claiming of the Chinese name is one way of reclaiming my voice.
In another sense, you never had a Japanese name. So in your case, it's not even a matter of reclaiming something. It was already in some ways lost.
Yes, I think my father was rather a generation ahead of his time. He didn't think it was necessary for us to have any connection with Japan or learn about the traditions of Japan. So he thought May was sufficient for me. Actually, it's my middle name because when one of the missionaries asked my father, "What are you going to name this new child?" He said May, because she was born in the month of May. She said, "Oh, that's far too lonely. You'll have to give her another name. Why don't you name her Lillian after my sister?" So I was christened then Lillian May, but because my father and mother chose the May, I got to be known and called as May. But actually, that's my middle name.
But these rules changed in your family.
Yes, when my brother, who was the 5th child after 4 sisters, then he was given a Japanese name with the specific meaning, as the Japanese always had a special meaning for their names. And so he was always known before he went to school, as Juji. But somewhere along the line, he decided he didn't want to be known by that, and he changed his own name to George, and so now he's just known as George, but he was given a Japanese name. I think my older sister also has a Japanese name, because when my mother and dad had just come from Japan, they weren't familiar enough to be able to pick a girl's English name. So, but she's the only one that has a Japanese name.
So quite a lot of stories behind our names. And some of these rules around the names change depending on our cultures and what's more important. In your story, it sounds like, well, the son is finally born, so we can reclaim our heritage again, and that desire was not strong enough when the girls were born. So when was it that, when were other instances that we, as women in our cultures and also within Canada, when was it that we began to experience that all was not well? Although when we talked about this, we all realized that we are all educated women. We understand the issues around other Asian women who do not have the same history as we do personally. And yet we know that all was not well with ourselves personally, with our sisters as a group, with Asian women. When did we first begin to realize this?
Well, I think from a historical perspective, in terms of the Confucian ethics that we're all, that our families were raised with for generations and generations. So in my family, I don't know if I ever understood it, or if I just accepted it, because that's sort of the way we're raised to accept things and not fight too often, you know. But my older sister, there are 3 girls in our family, my mother was always called, and my mother and father were always called after her. They were called, my mother particularly was always my sister's mother. And so, you know, she was never called my mother. And then when my brother was born, after 3 girls, then she became my brother's mother.
Oh,
Address
in your family it was also 3 girls first and then a boy?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's exactly what happened in my family. And you were asking when we first realized that something wasn't all well with our world. Well, as I look back, I think it must have been when my brother was born, and then, of course, the first few years as he grew. Because, well, you know, the same Confucian ways and customs and so on that made children's mothers be called by their children's names also meant that the older you are, the more respect you get, right? That's why we have to defer to President May, Dr. Mayhew. So anyway, there were 3 girls in our family. I was the second one. I have an older sister who is 4 years older than I am, and we, of course, pay her great respect. Nobody could call her by her name, given name. I mean, I always call her oldest sister, and everybody called me second sister. At least my third sister did, I mean, the younger one. So then I felt pretty good. But when my brother was born, and he was the 4th child to remember, so in terms of seniority, he was the youngest. I mean, everybody could call him by his name, and he has to call us by second sister, third sister, and so on. But, you know, even though I was quite young, I noticed things were really strange. Because normally, the older ones would get the most privileges at home. We would get, you know, the best kind of food, we'd get the greatest amount, we would get new clothes. But when this boy came along, he actually was given the best food. Like, for example, in China, it's very seldom that we have milk, and especially not fresh milk. While we were living in Hong Kong, he actually got to drink fresh dairy milk from the dairy farm. And all of us had to drink either soy milk or milk made from milk powder. And of course, there were other things, you know, that he got all the best attention, he got the most caring, you know. So I started thinking, gee, this doesn't sound right. The rules get changed when you are a male. And I guess that was my first if you want to call it consensitization or being, my consciousness was being raised about such a thing as there is a big difference according to your gender. So I guess that was my first introduction to sexism, although I couldn't name it then, of course.
Well, it took me a lot longer. You were quite young, but I have to admit, and I really kind of hate doing this because it's the first time now I'm admitting this to anybody actually, and it didn't come all of a sudden, but when I was married, my husband, he was a minister, you know, with the United Church, and looking back on it now, I really just followed him and did whatever he said. And although I didn't think it was strange, I just accepted it. He allowed me to do anything I wanted to do, and he expected it almost, of working in the church for him, for our congregation. But he never, ever let me step outside the bounds of our congregation.
Wow.
And he expected me to be right beside him for everything, all the visitation, every meeting, things like that. And it wasn't until after he passed away, you know, that I suddenly discovered that I could maybe soar and expand my field and kind of see what's beyond our church. And that was just sort of my beginning to realize that I was really held down. I didn't realize it because I was able to do whatever I wanted to in our
Within given parameters.
Yes,
Or
yes.
you
So
were
you thought.
Oh, yes.
My experiences of knowing that things were not right in the world was when I was going to school in Manila, which was run by German Benedictine nuns, and the people who paid for their tuition went to the part of the college that had the tall walls and so on. And the nuns ran what they called a free school, which was for poor children. And they were separated from us, the paying ones, by a chain link fence, so we could see them and they could see us. But they never, ever joined us. Not in play, not in activities, not in social events. So I knew then that things were not right in the world because the poverty and the class separation in the Philippines was so severe that you were not a complete person. So there was a barrier between myself and the poor students. And then there was another barrier because the whole school had a very high wall, and beyond those walls were slum areas, slum neighborhoods. And in high school, I remember a nun leading us through there so we could serve the people in this neighborhood. And of course, as I look back now, I realize that it was not an equal relationship. It was we, the privileged, were going to go out there and we were going to help these helpless ones. And it's only now that, of course, I'm beginning to understand that the empowerment of everyone in the community is really what I feel like working towards. So in terms of those early moments of awareness, where has that journey taken us? What do our journeys look like today? How have we translated all of these names and these childhood memories and these early adult awareness? Where has that gone?
Well, it's been a long, hard-fought battle, I think. For instance, with regard to my name, when I got married, I married tall, skinny white guy, as my mother called him, calls him still. But you know, a lot of people automatically assumed I would change my name, and I struggled hard enough to get my Korean name back, and to suddenly throw away my family name just didn't seem right. And yet, as a child, I always wanted so much to have an English last name as well, so that would normalize me. It would make me more normal. And when I had the opportunity, of course, to change my last name, I thought, no, I don't think I can. It was just became a personal, I don't know, just became a very personal point for me that I kept my name.
If you did change it, what would you have been called?
Well, if you had talked to me on the telephone and you can hear my voice, I don't have a very strong accent. Maybe it's a strong Canadian accent, if anything. But I would introduce myself as Bonnie Maxwell. So,
Great.
But Jin-Sun, what are you doing now with your journey? How are you connecting your heritage and what you've reclaimed with what you're doing today?
well, I think that for me, in the field that I'm studying, counseling psychology, and doing a lot of advocacy work for human rights and those sorts of things, I think it's, you know, I've been called a reluctant pioneer, and I guess in many ways I am, because I certainly didn't go into this whole thing thinking I was going to be some groundbreaking person, but it seems that, you know, I've had the privilege and the support and the windows of opportunity, and as a result I have a lot of responsibilities. So my own journey is, I guess, just to keep on doing the things that are being offered to me. And
Well, and in your field of cultural and racial identity and biculturalism.
yeah.
You know, all this claiming back of one's own culture has come to me very late. I think partly it's because what my parents wanted to happen really did happen, and I certainly linked myself with the colonial powers. When I went to university, I majored in English literature because I was quite intent on showing them that I could do as well in their language as they do. And
You
I
mastered it too.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you call having a doctorate in it mastering, maybe I did. But what it has given me, though, is a great love of English literature and other literature. And I still write poetry. It's part of my name, too. But I think the important thing for me is that I am now beginning to realize the vital importance of not just being Chinese or a woman or a Christian, but actually putting all those together. So that for me the struggle is how to be a faithful Christian who is an Asian living in Canada and who happens to be a woman. And the way I'm doing it is to reclaim some of my spiritual roots that are, for example, Taoist, so that in my spiritual practice I would bring in some Taoist spiritual disciplines, like I go on walks that I call Taoist walks. I also use Chinese calligraphy as a spiritual discipline, so that it's not simply a way of practicing my handwriting, but also a way of concentration, a way of contemplation. And the other thing that I'm trying to continue my journey with is to be very specific and very intentional about targeting the things that I do for a culture-specific audience. So, for example, at the Vancouver School of Theology, we have a Native Ministries program, and what I try to do there is to really, really address the whole importance of being culture-specific, so that the resources or the methods we use are, you know, suitable to that particular culture. In my own linking with the United Church, we have just actually produced a very specific, culture-specific resource. Jin-Sun, you have it. Because you wrote one of the stories, right?
Well, yeah.
Tales of Interracial
Yeah,
Marriage.
it was from an interview that I did with a couple of people, and yeah, I'm happy to see it out.
It's great.
And May, what about your journey? What's it looking like now?
Well, I feel very, very committed to helping the Asian women to recognize that they have an important contribution to make in life, and to try to to see that they have a responsibility in this area. I think many of them are probably at the stage that I was when I was married, and I thought I was liberated when I really wasn't, because I've noticed that in one of the ethnic congregations, where the women in this congregation think that they're very liberated and that they have full control of things. And as someone mentioned, yes, they do when it comes to their financial management in their home and bringing up their children and being responsible for their education and being masters in the kitchen. So they think they're liberated and that they're really very active in their role. But when it comes down to really the important things like in the church structure, I don't see women in many of the Asian churches where the women have any voice at all. And I am really anxious to see that they realize that they do have a voice and that they should wake up to this. And Anne has been very helpful in setting up our consultation. Anne, would you like to tell me a little bit about that consultation?
You mean that conference?
Yes.
That we gave this wonderful name to?
Yes.
Sounding the Bamboo.
Yes.
Well, I guess the bamboo has not been voiced, so there's no flute, but once you let the voice come through, it becomes a musical instrument. And I think that's a symbol for this racial ethnic minority women in ministry conference that will be happening at the end of June. Most of us are going anyway, right? But I guess that's, for me, bespeaks the importance of solidarity, linking together horizontally across the different minority groups. Because I find that one of the things that dominant group people like to do is for us to link with them and not link with one another. So this conference will be very important. And I think happening in the middle of the decade of the churches in solidarity with women is going to make it really even more important.
We've also talked about how we are trying to take our personal experiences and link them to issues that relate to other women in our society, Asian women, issues of justice, issues of poverty and class separations. That we're always running into dominant groups, whether within our cultures or other cultures interacting with our own, and we interacting with other cultures. So if it's not gender, there's sexism, and there are issues certainly of race, our accents, languages, and these are perhaps issues that also will come out at the conference.
We certainly hope so.
So we have had our discussion with 4 women with links to China, Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. It was our privilege to share our experiences with you.
The preceding program was produced through the facilities of Rogers Community 4, Vancouver. We want to hear from you and invite you to leave your comments and suggestions on our 24-hour response line message machine. Please call 731-5812.